Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched WandaVision episode 7. Let's talk about it. So WandaVision episode 7 picks up right where we left off in episode 6, where we saw Wanda expand the hex. Now, if you've been watching my reviews up until now, you'll know that I suspected that Wanda would be expanding the hex after a comment that Jimmy Woo made in episode 4, where he said that theoretically the world could get bigger. And we saw that happen exactly as he suspected at the end of episode 6. But before even that happened, we also saw that Wanda was already stretching her limits when it came to the magic that she was using to sustain this much more complex world than we started off with in episode 1. As we saw Vision kind of wander off in the outskirts of the neighborhood, we started to see these characters that weren't as animated, weren't as detailed, and weren't living as complex lifestyles as the characters who were closer to Wanda and at the center of the town. So this was all very important context for what sets up episode 7, where we see Wanda in a very much depressed state at the beginning of the episode. It was a promo that they released for this episode, and it already set the tone for the episode for us. We already see that for this episode, the sitcom that they're taking inspiration from is in fact Modern Family, which brought a smile to my face because once again, this is an era that I'm much more familiar with. Although I have to say, overall, when it comes to the sitcom element of this episode, I think it was the weakest. I mean, it makes sense because obviously we're slipping away from the sitcom elements and we're diving into the real world now. Wanda has to return back to the real world where she has to face actual demons. But in terms of how they utilize the sitcom elements here, it was definitely palpably weaker than, for example, episodes 1 and 2, where we really saw the sitcom elements be brought to life as Wanda lived in her imaginary world. But after the clip that was released on YouTube, we did get the opening title sequence for this episode, and it was very much inspired by The Office, in my opinion. I feel like the music was very similar, and of course we all noticed that instead of saying WandaVision, a lot of those cards just said Wanda, because right now she is on her own. Vision is off. Vision is off trying to find answers, and Wanda is just trying to hold herself together after the events that occurred presumably the previous night. I think this takes place the day afterwards, but I could be mistaken. But after those events occurred, she's just trying to get it together, and so you see that reflected in the opening sequence where it's just her name because she's very much riding solo for this episode. But at the very end there, we do see WandaVision once again, and it's kind of styled in the style of Modern Family, so just kind of tying back that sitcom into today's episode. But once again, as per usual, when it comes to WandaVision, this episode was full of revelations, of incredible moments, and once again the episode very much delivered on the hype, on the anticipation that keeps us going from week to week. Honestly, this is excruciating at this point. I cannot believe that, frankly, that we've made it 7 weeks. First of all, let's pat ourselves on the back for that one, but also that we have 2 weeks to go. We're still getting these half-an-hour episodes. How am I supposed to hold it together? Now, apparently the total series overall was announced as being a kind of more than 6-hour series, I believe. But as of right now, according to a ton of mathematicians on Twitter, we have not yet reached those 6 hours. So apparently either the next 2 episodes, the final 2 episodes of the series, will be much longer, or we will have a finale that is incredibly long to make up for the rest of the 6 hours. Or maybe the 6 hours will just be made up by a ton of credits at the end of the finale, just inexplicably, just a ton of credits that make up an hour-long end credit sequence. Or whatever, I digress. Before we dive into my thoughts on this episode of WandaVision, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's dive into the themes, the characters that were explored in this episode. So the first theme of the day is Wanda has lost control. She's lost it. She's lost it completely. Like I mentioned earlier on, the sitcom elements of this episode were weaker, but it was because Wanda was feeling far more depressed. She has lost control of the world that she presumably built, or has at least been sustaining with her magic. And you can see at the beginning of the episode that the fallout from what happened in episode 6 has really taken a toll on her. And I have some theories about this, which we'll get into later on, but I just find it very fascinating to see how the world around her is starting to deteriorate, to see how she's no longer able to maintain the set design, the production design of the sitcoms that she's living in. And as a result, we start to see a lot of the props and the decor of the house start to change inexplicably. She's no longer able to maintain the house's appearance and no longer able to maintain the integrity of the hex. Now, like I said, I do have theories as to why this might be the case. My main theory is, of course, because she expanded the hex, and as we already saw in episode 6, there were already limitations to what she could do for the hex, and before she even expanded it, as we saw from those non-playable characters that we can see oftentimes in video games, like those people who were just stagnant, who were just stoic, who didn't really live a life on the borders of the hex. And after Wanda went ahead and made it bigger to save Vision and to encapsulate him within the hex once more, you can see how much of a strain it's taking on her. But my second theory also revolves around her depression. I find it so interesting that this episode really did explore the depression, the trauma, the PTSD that this character is actually going through. Long gone are the days where we're fake smiling. Long gone are the days where we're playing games, where we're playing house in an imaginary sitcom. Like, long gone are those days. Wanda is so real in this episode in comparison to the other episodes that we've seen her play house and play this loving wife to Vision. All of a sudden, that's just been dropped. She's starting to accept the fact that, first of all, Vision is very much aware of what's going on and he disapproves entirely. And she even says to her children, you know, there's nothing I can do if he doesn't want to be here, which is so heartbroken because she's accepted that she can't control him anymore. She's accepted that he doesn't approve of the decisions that she's made, despite the fact that some people do. Pietro, we'll talk about him in a second, but she's accepted this, and it's brought her such profound sadness because she basically did all of this for him and for her as well, somewhat selfishly. We'll also talk about that, but she did a lot of it for him so that they could have a happy life together, and that's just kind of disappearing right before her eyes. And every glitch that she sees in the hex is a kind of reminder of that, the fact that she's losing control of this reality that she wanted to cling on to so badly. So I think this character is just filled with so much pathos. I really applaud Marvel for really digging in there, for not shying away from the actual depression, to the point where we even get an ad for depression medication, or the likes of which we would see in the MCU. I just admire the fact that they really went there. At the beginning of the episode, we even see her lying in bed and her kids come up to her and tell her something's wrong because their remote controls keep changing into different eras, and she's just not even bothered. She's not even motivated to get up, which is so real. And her son even tells her, like, Mom, I've got a headache, I'm hearing things. Obviously his powers are manifesting, but she can't even bring herself to do something about that. It takes her a while to get that motivation to get up. And again, this is obviously a symptom of depression, and it's so real for this character. I really admired the inclusion of that. But in addition to this, I also think that her depression is a symptom of her losing control of her world. I think to some extent she was also brainwashing herself when she entered Westview, and as a result she was able to play along seamlessly into each different era that was explored through the sitcoms. But this time around, again, because her magic is being stretched thin after the expansion, she can't even maintain that cheery attitude, that facade that she has been up until now. Now, as I've been mentioning, Wanda's magic being drained, especially after the expansion, I'm beginning to believe more and more that the person who was depicted in last week's ad, who was, you know, stuck in this island all by themselves and was withering away after they weren't able to take hold of the Yo Magic yogurt, I'm starting to believe that this character was in fact a representation of Wanda. I think that makes sense. I do believe that it's a kind of symbol of her magic being drained by someone who is predatory, someone who wants to take advantage of her. And initially this person may have been offering her the world, like they may have been offering her an opportunity to live in a fantasy where everything is just so much better and so much more happy and joyful for her, and she was able to go along with this for as long as that person needed. But now her magic is being drained. Whoever set her up in this reality is starting to drain her magic more so, and she is just left drained. Now when Wanda does manage to get downstairs and talk to her kids mention Uncle Pietro. Uncle Pietro's absence was incredibly loud, incredibly palpable. For a character character who was just so present and so heavily featured in the previous episode, for him to be completely absent was an interesting choice. And I think the fact that it's set up pretty clearly at the beginning, where Wanda says, you know, don't trust Uncle Pietro, he's not who you think he is. Like, she's already onto him after what he said, especially in episode 6, where he said, you know, it's not like Vision can die twice, your dead husband can die twice. Wanda wasn't having any of that. Wanda was like, excuse me, what did you just say to me? No. The jig is up for Pietro. Unfortunately, his facade only lasted for 1 episode. She is very much aware that he is not who he says he is, and I think it's great that she has informed her kids of this immediately as well, so they won't end up being trapped by Pietro in some weird way. They end up being trapped anyway, but not by Pietro, at least. Now, it's while she's having this conversation with her kids that all of a sudden, knock, 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 there goes that door again, and what do you know? Agnes comes to visit. Agnes, who's always there whenever Wanda needs her, and right now Wanda just needs a day to herself where she can just, you know, reminisce on the good old days and kind of figure out what her next steps are going to be. She just needs a time out. She just needs a day on her own, and so Agnes is there right on time to provide her with that relief. And so she comes and offers to babysit the kids, which is something that we see in the comics, apparently. I don't read them, but we see that in the comics quite often, with Agatha Harkness being a babysitter for Wanda's children. So I thought that was an interesting parallel there. We already know what's going down. We already knew what was happening. But when it comes to the show kind of telling us, hey, something is wrong here, I think this was a very clear indication. We see Agnes make an appearance in her signature purple. That's right, I'm just like Agnes. She makes an appearance in her signature purple from the comics, and she takes those kids away for a nice day so that Wanda can relax on her own. After which, Wanda heads towards the kitchen, gets herself a carton of almond milk, which of course switches, turns around, goes crazy right in her hand, because of course she's lost control of her magic. But we also do see a missing persons notice at the back of the milk carton, which we oftentimes see in real life. I don't know if we see that anymore, but that's interesting because it seems to be a missing child, which means that the kids that were inhabiting Westview, at least in the previous episode, were taken from somewhere. Like, they didn't just appear out of nowhere because Wanda willed them to. They seem to have been kidnapped, which honestly, I don't think enough people are focusing on right now. I don't think enough people are doing anything about that, because we already know Sword is not interested in that. They're not interested in actually solving crimes. They have ulterior motives. Hayward is a dick, as per usual. But when it comes to the kids being missing, I feel like someone should be making a bigger deal about that. Come to think of it, right now, I could see that missing kids notice on that carton as being a sort of foreshadowing for what's going to happen to Wanda's kids. Interesting. Now, the next key scene that we actually see Wanda in before that end scene, which we'll talk about most definitely when we get to Agnes's section, but she does have a mini confrontation with Monica. Now, Monica is in a very special place in her life at this point in time, but we do see just before the confrontation happens that Wanda does pop a pill. She does seem to be taking some sort of pill. Now, this pill seems to be some sort of antidepressant drug, and it seems to be the same pill that was advertised during this week's ad. And speaking of this week's ad, one of my favorite sections of these reviews, let's talk about this week's ad and what it could possibly mean. So this week's ad was for Nexus, some sort of antidepressant drug that is advertised, unfortunately, fittingly, for Wanda State right now. But we once again see the actress that we've been seeing throughout all of these, or almost all of these ads, as well as the actor who I do still believe perhaps will be representations of Wanda's actual parents. But this time around, she is also feeling very depressed in the ad. It's kind of mirroring Wanda's mental state, and she is recommended this pill that's called Nexus. Now, a lot of people have speculated that this name connects to the Nexus that was mentioned in Age of Ultron, which is, by the way, turning out to be a very important film for the canon of this series. But Nexus there was a kind of the center of the internet. It was kind of where everything was connected. When Tony Stark went up to, I think it was Denmark or Norway, he went there to try and figure out who it was that was kind of fighting against Ultron in the interwebs, and it turns out it was actually the AI Jarvis, who we also got a mention of in this episode. That was interesting because obviously this kind of brings to mind a sense of connections, a sense of, you know, all of these different ports being connected, and that's a kind of running theme throughout this episode, as you will see, especially at the end of the episode. But another meaning of Nexus, apparently in the comics, is that a Nexus being is a being who remains in their same state no matter what multiverse or no matter what parallel universe they exist in. in, which I think is also very, very important, because someone is clearly trying to manipulate her into creating an alternate reality to exist in, to kind of escape in. Because the ad does say that the drug is able to bring you to your reality of choice, and that seems to be exactly what Wanda has done in creating Westview. But interestingly enough, the ad also says that the side effects of this drug is, well, one of the side effects is depression, is losing your sense of self, and the ad also presents an option of living in your truth as being a side effect of the drug, which is all very interesting. To me, if I'm trying to decode it, which is one of my favorite things to do for the series, I think the drug is a representation of, you know, Westview and the world that Wanda created in order to escape her actual reality. And I think, you know, the idea that this world would create depression in her is kind of manifested in this episode. As I said, I don't quite understand what it means by presenting living in your truth as a side effect. That seems to be interesting. Perhaps it's the idea that inevitably she would snap out of it. She was always going to snap out of it, and perhaps whoever helped her create this world knew that. They just wanted her to stay in it for as long as possible so that they would be able to drain the magic from her to fulfill whatever nefarious means that they have. Okay, so next up we have Wanda's twins, and as I mentioned, it seems as though that Billy's powers are really starting to manifest in this episode. We already saw a hint of his telepathic abilities in the previous episode, which played a huge role in informing Wanda of what was happening to Vision, but this time around it seems as though it's kind of a constant disturbance for him, hearing all of these voices, which makes sense. I mean, we've seen this with characters like Professor X and the X-Men franchise. It's a very familiar trope where someone who has telepathic abilities can just hear a ton of thoughts. Oh my god, we also saw this in Twilight. That's what I was thinking of. I said X-Men, but I was thinking of Twilight. I was thinking of Edward Cullen, who always, you know, heard people's thoughts, and that's why he found solace in Bella, because he couldn't hear her thoughts. So I find that very interesting then, because later on, when Billy does end up hanging out with Agnes and his brother, he says that he likes her house and he likes being around her because he can't hear anything from her. So that's an interesting parallel. I do think it's interesting to see, you know, Billy's powers manifesting in such a way, because it really does show that he is a powerful being, just like his brother. But as I said, when it comes to the twins, the main point here is that they're being babysat by Agnes, and we later learn that that is a terrible, horrible thing because she is very much interested in them. We've known since pretty much day one that she has been trying to push Wanda to have children, that the entire town had an incentive for Wanda to have kids. We didn't know what that incentive was, but obviously we're getting closer and closer to finding out as we've reached episode 7, and there are only 2 more episodes after this. And I really liked the way that the show depicted that scene with Agnes and the children. I never felt comfortable with those kids being in Agnes's house. First of all, it's the first time that we've seen the inside of Agnes's house, and it very much reminded me of the Vampire Diaries. It reminded me of the Salvatore mansion, okay, where it's kind of gothic, kind of creepy, something that you would see in a horror film. So I definitely wasn't put at ease when she was just hanging out with them, feeding them. It was giving me Hansel and Gretel vibes, okay, you know, witches that eat children, okay. And she did even mention earlier on in the episode that she once bit a child. Listen, we're getting the vibes, we're getting the witchy vibes. At this point, you know, WandaVision already knew people would figure this out, like the internet would figure it out, so we needed to move on, and that's exactly what they're doing swiftly in this episode. But I felt very much uneased when I saw those kids hanging out in Agnes's house. I knew something was going to come up. I knew it was going to come up, and guess what? We were right. We were all right, because yes, let's talk about the huge reveal that Agnes is in fact Agatha Harkness. I've been saying this. I've been saying this from day one, although to be fair, it's because I internet. Like I don't read the comics, but I internet, so that's how I knew. But to see the reveal, it was pretty satisfying, because even though it was something that we already knew, or at least most of us, the way that it was revealed was quite creative and quite enjoyable and quite catchy. The song was catchy, the song was a bop. I approve. So first off, now that we know that Agatha is in fact Agatha Harkness, let's dive into this character. I first want to dive into her role in this series and how she's been presented as a character to us, because it's been a roller coaster, quite frankly. I've already mentioned in my reviews how interesting it is that Agnes, or Agatha now that we know, always pops up whenever Wanda needs something. I found that very interesting, and there have been times when I thought maybe it was because Wanda was controlling her, and so she just instinctively knew when Wanda needed something, just like many of the other residents of Westview do, like the postman and Herb. So she was just popping up whenever Wanda needed something from her. And now it seems as though that while she was in fact popping up whenever Wanda needed something, it wasn't because she cared about Wanda's wants or needs, or even because she was being wholly controlled by Wanda, but rather because she wants Wanda to stay in that world for as long as possible. She doesn't want anything disturbing the peace that she has created for Wanda so that she can start draining her magic from her. And so that's why we see in that, sequence that Agatha has, which is apparently very much inspired by The Monsters, which is a show that I didn't know about until today, whatever. But in that sequence, we see these various occasions where she uses her magic to make things go her way. One occasion being, of course, the appearance of Pietro, which, as Wanda mentioned, she had absolutely nothing to do with, and completely explains why she was so shocked that Pietro showed up at her door. So it turns out that Agatha was doing everything that she could to ensure that Wanda was happy, docile, okay, she didn't question too much. And I also wouldn't be surprised if she's been behind a lot of these ads that we've been seeing that have just been, promoting Wanda to just stay where she is and to just forget the outside world. And in that title sequence that we saw where it was Agatha all along, she did also reveal at the very end that she was in fact the one who killed Scratchy, which lends credence to my theory that she killed Scratchy so that she could figure out whether or not Wanda would bring him back to life and whether or not she'd be able to. Kathryn Hahn just completely sold that entire sequence. She's been selling the character of Agatha or Agnes throughout the entire series, but in that sequence, oh, she was just phenomenal. She was phenomenal. And to see the reveal as well that her performance from the previous episode, that got me, like, I will happily put my hands up and say it got me questioning, because I knew that Agatha was working with the bad guy. Like, I knew, I've always been knowing, but when she did do her little performance, her little Academy Award nominated performance to Vision, where she was talking about how confused she is and how Wanda won't let them escape him, blah blah blah, I was convinced. Like, I was tricked. What can I say? I was bamboozled. I was led astray. And actually, this does lend some credence to another theory that the internet had, where you see in episode 5 where Vision actually broke Norm out of the spell that he was under, and Norm was saying, she is in our heads, she is controlling us. And many thought that instead of it referring to Wanda, it was actually in reference to Agatha, and it seems as though that is likely, and we'll see the role that she plays, I believe, in the next episode, because I think that's going to be a flashback episode where we see the origins of Agatha Harkness. Now, speaking of the origins of Agatha Harkness, let's talk about her role in the comics. Now, if you've been here for a second, you already know. You already know I don't read the comics, okay? Listen, this is all interneting. This is all Twittering. This is all Redditing, okay? So just hear me out. Apparently, the character of Agatha Harkness in the comics, she is like thousands of years old. She's thousands of years old. She's an immortal being who got her powers from some celestial entity. I don't know. Not the actual celestials, but like a magical entity, okay? And she got her powers ages ago, so she's just been roaming the world for thousands of years. But it wasn't up until the Salem witch trials era that she actually formed a cult in, I believe, New England. I think that's where Salem is. And unfortunately, the Puritans in that area kind of got wind of the situation that was going on, and they began these Salem witch trials, at least in this canon. Now, I find that interesting because earlier on in the episode, we do see Agnes ask the boys to check out a mole that's on her back, like she believes that to be a mole. And we do know that from the Salem witch trials in real life, things like moles or birthmarks were used as proof for women being witches. Crazy. Misogyny, crazy. But anyways, in this canon, it would make sense then that she has a mole, because that is a kind of classic symbol of a witch. Now, as many have mentioned, in the comics, Agatha isn't strictly always a villain. Sometimes she's working for villains like Mephisto or Nightmare or whatever. All of these other villains, but strictly speaking, she's sometimes kind of sways between the good and bad side. So I wonder if she really is the one who is in control here fully. I know it sounds crazy, okay? I know that we got the whole song where it was Agatha all along, but something tells me that maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm grasping at straws at this point. Maybe the show is literally trying to tell us, guys, stop guessing. This is the truth. This is actually Agatha's doing. But what if it isn't? Mephisto, like, what if it isn't? What if it actually isn't Agatha who's doing this alone? Because I've been saying from the very beginning that I think that there is a 3-tier system where you have, the residents of Westview, you had Wanda controlling them, you had Agatha acting as this kind of liaison between Wanda and whoever actually wants her powers, and I still think that could be the case. I think it could be a red herring, but honestly, because we're at episode 7 and now episode 8, I wouldn't be surprised if she was the actual villain. Perhaps a little bit disappointed because a lot of us saw it coming from a mile away, but we'll see. It all depends on how they handle it in the next 2 episodes. But if she does end up being the ultimate villain of the series, it will be a very interesting fight fight to the death at the end, where we have that finale between these 2 incredibly powerful women. Before we move on to yet another powerful woman who was introduced in this series, ooh, I can't wait to talk about it. First off, let's talk about the end scene with Wanda and Agatha, because after she has that big reveal that she is in fact the bad guy, she's holding Senor Scratchy like, you know, he's an evil black cat, which I think he may actually be in real life. Like, he may actually be a black cat that she often has in the comics, but she's just kind of formed him into Senor Scratchy so that it wouldn't be too obvious, because it 100% would be. It's just running around with a black cat. But anyways, I did find it interesting how the setup of her basement, okay, where you had these various doors, it seems as though it's possible that this could be some sort of kind of crossroads to different portals, maybe to different multiverses. This is the first time that we've gotten a sense of like traditional magic, traditional witchcraft. Honestly, speaking of the Vampire Diaries, that's the vibes that I was getting from the end of this episode, because all of a sudden it became creepier. There was no longer this feeling of a sitcom. It very much felt like a horror film as Wanda is wandering around Agatha's house trying to find her kids, and then she reaches that basement, which is exactly where Agatha wanted her to go. It seems as though Wanda is locked into that basement at the end there, but she reaches it and you see all of these vines surrounding the entrance, and it feels just magical, traditionally magical, in a way that we haven't really seen in the MCU. When it comes to the MCU's version of magic, as Thor says, you know, magic is just science that humans haven't quite grasped onto. And when we had Doctor Strange, the magic was presented in these, you know, strict geometric shapes. It was presented as a sort of craft that Doctor Strange needed to learn, as opposed to a natural ability that someone might have. And I think in the case of Agatha, it feels like she was a natural born witch, a traditional witch, which again, we haven't seen much of in the MCU. So I'd be fascinated to see how they manifest these powers. We already saw a glimpse of that, of course, in that sequence that she had, and also when she's controlling Wanda's mind at the end there, where her powers seem to manifest in this purple light that contrasts against Wanda's red energy and Monica's blue energy. Yes, my girl. Yes, my girl got the powers. Oh my goodness, I was so excited. Let's move on to Monica. First of all, Marvel said happy Black History Month. Marvel said, here you go. You want a black female superhero? There, wrapped up in a neat bow. I was delighted. I was so excited. Monica is officially the first black female superhero in the MCU. Don't get me wrong, the MCU has done pretty well when it comes to black female representation. It took them a while, to be fair, okay? It took them a while. It took them up until 2017, where we had MJ, where we had Brunhilde, aka Valkyrie, but then we also got Black Panther, which gave us Princess Shuri, which gave us Okoye, which gave us Nakia. So we started to forgive them a little bit, but today I can happily say we're on our way to the path of redemption. Absolutely. Monica's entrance into the world of superheroes was just mwah, fabulous and so well earned, because she has the heart. She's had the heart from the very beginning of the show, with the empathy that she's shown towards Wanda, and now she has the powers to match. I am delighted to see her entry into the realm of superheroes. Phenomenal. Now, before we dive into Monica's origin story, which we get during this episode, first off, let's touch on a thing that kind of disappointed fans because there was this rampant speculation that the person that Monica was in contact with, who would help them breach the hex one more time without Monica getting too badly affected, because her genes were already changing after the other interactions that she's had with the hex. But many people did speculate that that person could possibly be a Reed Richards, okay, possibly be a Skrull, perhaps, possibly be, you know, someone within the MCU canon or within the Marvel canon that would be of interest, that would be a wow moment for the show. We are waiting for a big wow moment still, so people thought that perhaps that would be it. But unfortunately it wasn't. It was in fact just this general, like, I don't even know her name. I'm so sorry. I don't even know her name. Kind of just felt bad for the woman who was portraying this character, because people were waiting for her to be something else. Like, people were waiting for her to be a mic drop moment. And unfortunately we were all kind of looking at our screens like, okay, but is someone behind her? Like, is someone, maybe someone's in the bushes over there? But it seems as though this general lady was there to bring this huge piece of machinery, this huge vehicle that perhaps MOINCA designed herself. And this vehicle was supposed to be this kind of fortified machine that would be able to breach the hex. But unfortunately, it turns out that even that couldn't do the job. And so MOINCA ends up doing the job herself. And we get this very interesting sequence where she is breaking through. She is just pushing through sheer will at this point. She is pushing through, and you hear the voices of all of these characters from Captain Marvel, including Captain Marvel herself and her mother Maria, and indeed Nick Fury himself. And they're all just like encouraging words because, you know, growing up, she was surrounded by superheroes. She was surrounded by these, you know, extraterrestrial beings and technology. So she's just kind of thinking about that. It's kind of acting as this big push that she has, the strength, the true strength behind her in order to break through this barrier. And I think it was really moving. It was really touching. I think it was really inspirational. As far as superhero origin stories go, I do think it was pretty well done, especially considering that it was slotted into a Disney Plus show instead of a solo movie. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm just saying. I will say though, if I'm being very nitpicky, okay, and listen, this means a lot to me, so I have a right to be nitpicky, okay. I didn't love the graphics when she's going through the hex. Okay, I understand what was going on there. You know, she was literally being broken apart into the different characters that she was playing. You see Geraldine pop up at one point, but it feels like she was very much being stretched and pulled apart and being remade as she went through that hex. I completely understand what they were going for, but sometimes the graphics gave me, you know, early 2000s cartoon-ish, little bit of Inspector Gadget thrown in there with the stretching and the pulling. It did remind me of the chewing gum from the Inspector Gadget film, actually. If you get that reference, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. But so yeah, I think sometimes it looked a bit cartoonish. That's if I'm being very nitpicky, because the stakes are high for me. Okay, the stakes are high. I wanted perfection, and I almost got perfection. Teyonah Parris's portrayal of the character, her actoring in this scene was indeed perfection, but the CG, the effects itself wasn't my favorite, although I did very much enjoy seeing the way that she saw the world and when she went back into the hex and how she's able to register these radio waves that no one else can see. That was very well carried out. I did like the CG for that. But as I said earlier on, she was going through a moment, okay? She was going through a day. And so when she does finally meet Wanda, you know, they have this confrontation where Wanda is like, listen, I will throw you back out of my house if I have to. Okay, don't make me hurt you now. It seems as though now that MOINCA has her powers and she's even fitted out in her signature photon colors, she definitely has a pep in her step. She has some confidence behind her words. I absolutely loved it when she said, I haven't been saying a word of a lie this whole time. The only lies that have been coming out of my mouth are the ones that you put in it. I loved that line. Seems as though that the show has very much created a parallel to Wanda in MOINCA, someone who has also experienced great loss, and so recently as well, because it's only been a few days since she found out that her mother died. And so MOINCA, of all people in this situation, can identify with Wanda's pain. That's why she's so much more open to communicating with Wanda in comparison to some other people. Hayward, in comparison to some other people, she actually wants to reach an understanding with Wanda as opposed to just bombing everything like others want to. Okay, so speaking of the other villain of this series, it's time for my third favorite segment of these reviews, and that is Hayward is a dick. Hayward is a dickhead once again. What's new? When we see him, he's speaking to a sword officer and telling them to get things ready for whatever he's about to do to that dome. I suspect he's going to try and bomb it because that's what his kind does, just bomb things. So I suspect he's going to try and bomb it and breach it that way somehow. And now, thanks to Darcy's hacking and Jimmy Woo receiving the message before she was sucked into the hex herself, we do have a confirmation that Hayward was working on a project to get Vision back and to reassemble him to make him into some sort of weapon. And this project is called Code Cataract, which is a funny play on, you know, vision, because cataract is a disease of the eye that kind of makes you blind, and so it's the opposite of vision. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, so we do have that revealed earlier on in the episode where Jimmy Woo is kind of receiving that email that Darcy sent him. So as I've been saying, Hayward is a bad guy, but he's a different kind of bad guy. He's not a mystical bad guy in the way that Agatha is. He is looking to get a hold of Vision, who is this powerful technology in his eyes that he can use to perhaps defend the world against any future threats like Thanos. And on the reverse side of things, you have Agatha, who, like I said, is more of a mystical being, and she is looking for Wanda, not because of any technological advancement, but because of these mystical powers that she has. Finally, let's talk about Darcy and Vision, because as I suspected last week, Darcy did lend a helping hand to Vision to kind of catch him up on everything that's been happening after he was suffering from amnesia and wasn't able to remember his role in the MCU previously. And so she was able to, you know, catch him up with the previously on Vision's life. And all of this whilst they were driving this van, which kept stopping and starting because clearly someone did not want them to come back home to Wanda's house, whether it was Agatha because she knew that Vision would be a threat, or whether it was Wanda herself because she wasn't ready to face him, who knows. But either way, there was a lot of stopping and starting on that front. But Darcy does manage to inform Vision of what's been going on, and several things come out of this. First of all, we get a quick little recap into Vision's role in the MCU, and I found it really touching, just in a kind of meta way, to see how instrumental Paul Bettany's been in the MCU from day one, because he voiced Jarvis before he was even Vision, before Vision was even a gleam in Kevin Feige's eye. He voiced Jarvis, and I really enjoyed the character of Jarvis. I have found myself missing him most recently because Vision has become more of a person, and it seems like his Jarvis side has been coming out more and more, which was very fitting to see him being mentioned in this episode. So it was really nice to kind of reminisce on the days where Jarvis was a character in his own right, until of course we got to Age of Ultron, where he was given this vibranium body by Ultron, who wanted to inhabit it. It's very interesting to see him kind of process that parallel, the fact that someone created him in order to inhabit him, in order to control his body. And now it seems as though, you know, people are still trying to control him. You have Wanda still trying to control him to be this perfect husband and live this perfect lifestyle. Also, of course, you have Hayward, who's trying to take control of him and make him into a weapon. And you have Tony Stark himself, actually, who was constantly reprogramming Vision, or in that case Jarvis, to suit his needs as well. It seems as though all of this time there have been so many people who have played a role in controlling Vision. He's never really felt like a being that has his own autonomy. That's something that I really had to stop and reflect on, because it's such an interesting character arc for this character, and I do believe that it will lead to a full arc for him in this series. Whether it'll be a very tragic one or we'll see him die again, it's gonna be so sad. At least I suspect that this time around, if he does die, it will be his own decision. It will be, sadly, one of the biggest decisions that he makes in his life, and he will do it for himself and for the people that he cares about. But if he doesn't die, either way, I do think that the main point of Vision's arc in this series is to realize his own autonomy. But I do think that ultimately he still has an affection for Wanda, because another thing that comes out of this conversation is his appreciation of what Wanda has been through, especially for the past few weeks. I mean, she was already suffering a ton of trauma through the death of her parents, through the death of her twin brother, but the fact that, you know, the events of Avengers Endgame only happened a few weeks ago, which is clarified in this episode, just highlights how much she's gone through. And it really does serve to show, like, it absolutely is justified for her to feel this depressed, to feel this down, and to want this escape, because she's been through so much trauma over the last few weeks. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on WandaVision episode 7, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. Please make sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.